There we go. This time we're off properly, okay, I promise. Gentleman dropped his cigarettes in the water, so whilst we were waiting for you, I dashed out and rescued them for him. It was like, oh, thanks for that. I'll just pull over and wait for the chap to go past before I set off. Did they survive all right?
Yeah, I did my best.
Excellent, glad to hear it. Pardon me for the jungle tour.
Dans le XVIe siècle, oui. Et pour cette raison, il avait
So, afternoon everybody. Nice to meet you all. My name's Matt. I will be your guide today, as well as your engine. First thing I'm going to do, before we get going properly, is get the little health and safety bit out of the way, because I've got a couple of really obvious rules to keep you safe. First of all, let me balance my boat. Can you, sir, move about an inch to your right? A little bit more? There we go, perfect. You're my ballast. Because this balance is essential, do stay seated, avoid standing up. Also, please keep arms and legs inside the boat at all times, because some of the fish bite, and there are other boats on the river, and some of them aren't as well driven as mine. Yeah? Thirdly, mind out for your heads under the low bridges. And last of all, most importantly, remember, if we have an emergency, and if we start sinking, you can find our special emergency exits located here, here, and here. Oxygen will fall from the ceiling. What it's my job to do is to tell you about all of the sites and give you a bit of local history. So if you've got any questions, anything you would like to know, do not hesitate to ask, and I will do my very best to answer. I'm sure if I don't know, I can make up something very convincing. I'll start off by telling you about this little bridge here. This is a very special little bridge. It's been holding up Canterbury's High Street since 1134, so it's 878 years old this year. That makes it the oldest working road bridge in this part of the country. Better than that, it still carries all of the heavy traffic of Canterbury's High Street every morning, so I find it very impressive. Even more impressive though, up until the 1970s, it had all of the traffic from London to Dover flowing over the top of it, as it carried the A2. So, not doing badly for its age. The old bridge was widened in 1769, and slightly later on, it had part of this building added to it. This is the back of the Eastbridge Hospital. Not a medical hospital, no, actually a place of hospitality. This started off as an almshouse for weary pilgrims and travellers to stay in if they wanted to visit the shrine of Thomas Becket, the cathedral. If they wanted to stay there, they'd be given a nice straw bed and a hot meal free of charge in the undercroft, which is actually preserved and is open to the public to this very day. It's well worth a visit. It only costs £1 to get in, and for what you get to see, that's pretty good. I'll let this gentleman past.
T'as vu quand tout y avait le poisson? Madame Mélanie, arrête pas de mouiller!
Some of you are probably wondering about the river itself. This is the River Stour. S-T-O-U-R. Quite a common name for a river. There are lots of Stours in England, and that's because it's an Anglo-Saxon word, meaning angry or fast water. Some of you might be thinking that that's a very dumb name looking at it today, but no, it hasn't always been this slow. It's actually controlled nowadays by floodgates at the other side of the river. That's the reason that I can row here, and I'll show you those a little bit later. But in the meantime, don't worry about the pipe on the wall there, because they hardly ever flush their toilet. See my dinner there. That's how we keep them fresh. Probably notice a very boatman-shaped dent under this next bridge, roughly the same shape as my head. I promise that wasn't me, I'm far too short for that. But no, if I do bump my head, I'll give you the abridged version. This shallow area here is a great place to spot the fish, so have a look. I can see lots of little gudgeons here swimming around. They actually charge a £5 for those in pet shops. I thought to myself the other day, let's start a business. I can also see a small shoal of chub or dace over there. Afternoon, Andrew, you alright? Excellent. Whilst you have a peek out for the fish, I'll tell you a little about this island. This is a half-acre piece of land separated from the rest of the city. It is called the Franciscan or Greyfriars Island, and it gets its name from a small group of Franciscan friars, the Greyfriars, who came over to England in 1224. Greyfriars actually get their name from the colour of fabric they wore. It was coloured grey because they take vows of poverty, and they live off of charity and donation. Inevitably, the only fabric anyone would give them was plain grey and undyed. They were so shabby when they arrived in England that the locals thought that they might be robbers or spies, and so took them prisoner. They were actually going to be hung, until one of them managed to talk their way out of it. He pulled the rope from round his waist and offered it as the halter to hang them all with, and that kind of show of faith won the day, and they were set free. They ended up in Canterbury and were given this island to live on by a nobleman called Alexander of Gloucester. And they built up a little priory on the island, a couple of houses, a pen for some sheep, and a small chapel. And their priory lasted all the way up until the reign of Henry VIII. So when we had the Reformation of the Church, monasteries and priories like this were knocked flat all over the country. It's why we've got so few of them left. But I think we're very lucky here. Some of our most important buildings have survived. Up there, got a little Franciscan chapel on the bridge, and because of its survival, it's one of the oldest surviving Franciscan buildings in the country. Better than that, it's open to the public, free of charge as well. It survived because the soldiers sent to destroy it didn't want to knock down what was the only bridge onto the island. So they spared it, and that's very lucky for us. Do you mind your heads as we go back under here? Now, sir, I'm sorry to say, because of the law in England, we're not allowed to let people video our tour.
Sorry.
Still photos only, please. It's just because it comes under copyright when people inevitably stick it on Facebook or something.
All right.
Next thing I can show you is this little cottage here. This is called Assisi Cottage. It's named after St. Francis of Assisi. Now, it's 18th century, so it has nothing to do with the priory. It was actually built there during the Napoleonic Wars when we were fighting France. The guy who was Prime Minister at the time, a man called William Pitt the Younger, is responsible for the way it looks. And that's because he had to invent taxes to pay for this war. Have you ever heard of his infamous window tax? Yeah. It was a charge on windows, designed to make money from rich people with big houses, and nobody was thick enough to fall for it, because they could all brick in their windows to avoid paying, and that gave us buildings like that with just one on each side. You've heard of that before, but I bet you didn't know. It's the origin of the phrase daylight robbery. Not many people know that. People keep saying to me, that's a very, very strange tax. It's nothing compared to Peter the Great, the Russian Tsar, because he invented really weird taxes. He actually invented a tax on the length of his subjects' beards. A beard tax. And he did this because he was a fan of the French, and the French at the time had their beards very short. It was their fashion. But in Russia, the beard was a status symbol, so a lot of the men, some of the women, had big fluffy beards. And he invented it to encourage his nobles to give him a trim. But I think secretly he just couldn't grow a beard and was jealous. Under this next bridge, I'll share a local legend with you. A bit dubious about this, but lots of people believe it to be true. I've heard that this was the home of the first ever public toilet in Canterbury. Apparently it lived down that small alleyway at the mouth of the bridge. What it was a plank of wood hung over the river with a hole in the centre that you could sit on so that you could do your business in the river underneath. And the story has it that it lasted for a few years until a very large man tried to use it. He weighed too much, so he caused it to break, and he actually fell through, landing in all of the sewage underneath. Because of his awkward size, he couldn't get back up, and he actually drowned. So I bet you can imagine what he must have been thinking as he fell. Two words spring to mind. Also here we've got the old weaver's house. Very fine place to have some food nowadays. It actually gets its name as it was the centre of a thriving weaving industry in Canterbury. Big business brought here by French and Belgian Protestant refugees, Huguenots from France and Walloons from Belgium, who'd run away here to escape Catholic persecution in their own countries. And they brought this industry with them. And very quickly it formed the main industry of the city, employing 4,000 out of 12,000 people here, so one whole third. I mean, they've left a giant legacy here as well. The cathedral actually has a specially dedicated chapel to them, and they perform Sunday services here to this very day, spoken in French. Ahoy there, Captain Morgan.
Hello, Captain Matt.
Give him a little wave on the way past.
Hey guys. How are you?
It's very thumbs up. I get that a lot. Yes. Those Huguenots brought a couple of different industries to different parts of the world. They're responsible for South African winemaking and Swiss watchmaking as well. I think it's kind of typical that England got the one trade that didn't survive. And even more embarrassingly, we did it to ourselves, because we started importing fabric through the British Empire. They were put out of business, their building was sold. I'll tell you a bit more after we squeeze past Tom.
Right there.
Right there, Tom.
Right, Matt. Matt's from Drizzle.
He wishes he was from Somerset. Stop impersonating my accent.
I'm practicing quite a lot. I just want to
If you don't behave, I'll give him the Gloucester stare. But anyway, their building was sold. Since then it's been a couple of different things. It's been a watchmaker's, a jeweller's, it's been a butcher's and a baker's, although it's never been a candlestick maker's. But it was also Canterbury's house of ill repute. For ladies of negotiable affections, financially driven morals. And for men like Tom. I like that story, but it's got a few of us in trouble once. Apparently one of our guides once had this little old lady on the boat who, when he pointed the weavers out, looked at it and she went, "Oh, I used to work there." So I can only imagine his reaction to that. I think he said something along the lines of, "Well, let's just hope you were a watchmaker."
Big fishes.
See the big shoal of dace there? Dace and roach and chub are quite difficult to tell apart. The only way you can tell is that roach have little red fins. The bridge has great acoustics, good place to practice your singing. Do we have any singers on board? No? Oh, I didn't think so. That's a shame, because it's kind of appropriate. We've got our theatre here. Brand new. This opened in September. And now that it is open, it's reviving the theatre scene in the city, something that was sorely missed after the last Marlow closed. This one is very well worth a visit, because even if you're not going to see a show, you can go and look at its little gallery on the second floor. You get one of the best photos of the cathedral from anywhere in the city up there. And another reason I'm quite fond of it is it's next to my favourite pub, Canterbury Tales. Fine place to go for a pint. And also here we have this pair of 13th century buildings. These are the remains of a once enormous Dominican priory in this part of the city. A set of 11 buildings spread out over 5 acres, and were put up there by a Spanish friars called the Black Friars. These guys were incredibly rich, and their wealth and the value of their buildings is actually why these two survived. Squeeze past this gentleman and then I'll tell you how that worked.
Il avait
The soldiers decided not to destroy these because it made more sense to seize them in the name of the crown. So they were sold on, in fact, to a Flemish weaving merchant who made them part of the trade and have been here ever since. That one here on my right is actually somebody's house now, so he's a very lucky devil. And the one on the other side is now part of King's School, a large private school here, and they use this as their art department. So you can see some sculptures on the bank. The Black Friars also get their name from the colour of clothing they wore, but this time black was a way of showing off wealth. Black dye was the most expensive dye you could get, except for purple, of course, and that was reserved for royalty. In Canterbury, they made a lot of that money from selling cider, of all things. They grew the apples for that in this little orchard here. Yeah, selling cider was their main source of income, but they were also somewhat notorious for drinking their own profits. And I imagine they were 3/4 blasted most of the time. That's a tradition we students have tried to keep alive. Suspiciously silent man there. that belongs to Canterbury's floodgate, one of several sets that regulates the water in the city and helps to prevent Canterbury from flooding. These gates are very good at their job. If you lift all 12 of the gates at once, and the 6 underneath, the river speeds up until it's impossible to row on. But by that time, it's only about 4 inches deep. So we get stuck on the bottom of the river. If they did that to us now, I'd have to hop out and push. When they were installed, they served a dual purpose because as well as controlling the river, in this case they were very useful for helping the water to flow down to the right here. As I turn around, you probably notice the archway with a big pair of iron posts. I'll just spin the boat round, let Andrew get on his way, and then I'll tell you about those. Yes, these iron posts and the archways held huge water wheels. That's because these bridges are actually mill races. The wheels supplied power to this colossal mill all across this part of the river. It's called the Abbott's Mill, or the Abbey and Den Mill. Of course, it's no longer there. You're possibly wondering why. Well, I'll just say that the mill ground flour and was made entirely out of wood. You can probably guess the rest.
Yeah.
It was set on fire by a very careless worker. This guy went for a tea break, and in doing so left his blowtorch lit. The flame set the flour on fire. Very rapidly the mill was ablaze. It burned for 3 whole days, in fact. Firefighters tried to save it, but faced a tough decision, especially after a burning timber dropped onto the Miller's Arms, the pub next door. When that happened, they had to choose very carefully. Save the mill and everybody's jobs, or save the pub, rather a lot of beer. You'll be pleased to know they made the right decision. The pub is still there.